5 things you need to consider before buying a C6 Corvette. All right, so the first thing you're going to need to consider is engine choices. These vehicles ranged from '06 to 13 and had 4 different engine options over various models throughout the run. Now, the biggest thing that's going to dictate that for me and for most other people is going to be the price point, right? The LS2 models from the earlier generations run a little bit more affordable, while as the, LS3 kind of runs the mid-range. And the LS7 and the LS9 bad boys, well, they bring all the money. So entry level for that part of the conversation is going to be your LS2. That's going to be in all your base models from '05 to '07, right? Very round horsepower and torque numbers. 400/400, 400 foot-pounds of torque and 400 ponies at the crank for that. LS2 had its reliability issues with, harmonic balancer, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with like an ATI dampener. Guys, don't let the keyboard warriors tell you anything different. The LS2 is still a phenomenal engine. It's an LS at the end of the day. It is going to take loads and loads and loads of abuse and can handle a lot of power. Before, the LS3 and the later, LS engines came out, there was guys that's all they had. But now that there's keyboard warriors out there and they're, oh, LS2 have problems. Guys, it's still a fine engine. All right, so starting in '08, after the LS2, you are now left with the LS3, unless you're going to a Z06 or a ZR1. Those both have their own engines, as you know. But every model, whether it's a base model, a Z16 or a Grand Sport, is going to have the LS3 from '08 to 13. Horsepower gets a little bit of a bump, right? You're going from 400 in the LS2, now you're at 430 horsepower with the LS3. Also getting a little bit of a juice in the torque department too. You're going up to 424 foot-pounds of torque in the LS3. Now, you will look and see online that there are sometimes 2 different numbers advertised for the LS3 numbers. And that is because GM actually has 2 different numbers for those, depending on if your vehicle came with one particular option. So if your vehicle had one particular acronym added to the list of RPO codes, that acronym being NPP, your horsepower rating would be from 430 horsepower to 436, a modest 6 horsepower jump, right? And your torque will also get a little bit of a bump by 4 foot-pounds. What does NPP stand for? To be honest, there's not an official answer. It's just an RPO code, but some people say it's nuclear propulsion package. But really what it means is that you got a dual mode active exhaust. And if you ever want to have some fun in traffic and you're behind one of these and you want to see if it has an NPP package, if you look underneath here, you actually see those little vacuum actuators in the arms there. And what this exhaust does is that you have the half of the side of the muffler is actually a muffler setup, and then the other half is a bypass, right? So in just normal driving, it's going to keep it nice and quiet, but when you give it enough beans to open that valve open, it's going to bypass the muffler material and basically have a straight pipe muffler delete. And it sounds killer. Up next on the tier list is going to be GM's very own 427 cubic inch fire-breathing LS7 V8, which puts out a respectable 505 horsepower and 475 foot-pound of torque. But it's only found in the Z06 and only available with a manual transmission. There were some later models there towards the end, I think in like 12 and 13, of like an anniversary edition 427, where you could get the car with the LS7 and a convertible, but never the target top and never an automatic. The LS7 is a great engine, don't get me wrong, but, and I'm going to get some flack for this, it is a bit overhyped, right? And here's why. It does have its fair share of valve train issues, between inconsistencies with valve guide clearances and then them just straight up dropping valves or window and blocks. While it is a badass engine, it's handmade and it came with, its fair share of issues. But, if you're looking for all the cubic inches because you're going to build an absolute monster, by all means, right? For me personally, I just couldn't justify the extra, money for an LS7. And then the last option for that is the Mac Daddy LS9. Starting in '09, GM put all of the ponies they had and let them out of the gate for the Corvette ZR1. That was the Mac Daddy of its time, and it made a massive 638 horsepower through a 6.2 liter supercharged V8 with 604 foot-pounds of torque. Awesome car, and still bringing well close to six figures to this day. Fun fact, all manual Grand Sports, Z06 cars, and all ZR1 cars, all of the engine assemblies were hand built, not machine built. And only the manual Grand Sports, because they also got the dry sump system. The automatic Grand Sports did not. All right, second thing you should consider is going to be the trim model, right? So you have your base models, your Grand Sports, your Z06s, and your ZR1s. And we pretty much touched on all those based off the engine choices. But we're going to go over some quick differences between the models. Easiest way to tell the difference on these cars is on the front here. The Grand Sports, the Z06, and the ZR1 all are going to have this Ram Air intake scoop here on the front nose. Anything else that doesn't have this is going to be a base model. If you see that, that means the car is also going to have the wide body, because it's either a Grand Sport, Z06, or a ZR1. By wide body, literally the fenders, front and rear, are going to have actual width on them as compared to the standard base model. The front will have these gills here. If it's a Grand Sport, it'll have one big bulge if it's a Z06, or it'll have the two big nostrils if it's a ZR1. And then all three of those will get the duct right here. Now, these are functional ducts. These actually go straight into the brakes. Another piece on this here in just a second. The base models are going to be 10 times way more affordable than all the other options, right? But if you're looking for the best bang for your buck, you can go with something like a Grand Sport, or you can find maybe an older Z06 that may have some miles on it. Speaking of age, that brings up the third thing that we need to consider when looking for a C6 Corvette, and that is going to be the age and miles and the overall condition of the car, and I will tell you why. You could be like me, and you could be like, oh, it's an American car. You're going to have great part support. And don't get me wrong, the aftermarket support for these cars, because it's an LS car, is phenomenal. However, the OEM side of things, for things that aren't made by the aftermarket in a large performance sense, has been absolutely, completely yeeted into the trash by GM. Thank you, GM. What I mean by that is that almost 90% of all the product support for this generation of car has been discontinued. So you remember these little fender vents, right? If you're an idiot like me and happen to break one, you're not replacing it because it's discoed, unobtainium. You're going to find one on a parts car somewhere, and that means it's coming from a Z06, a Grand Sport, or a ZR1, which everybody wants the wide body fenders. You're probably not going to get it. There's a company that makes them in carbon fiber. That's the only option I can find, and they're $800 for the pair. Hence why I still haven't replaced it. Other parts that are discontinued are window regulator. You'd think, oh, it's a window regulator. It won't be bad. I can go to Napa or O'Reilly's and I could get one for 150 bucks. Absolutely fucking not. Look it up. Look it up and let me know what you find one for. The last one I found was $1,500 just for a window regulator. And that's if it's in stock. 9 times out of 10, it's not in stock. So you're forced to do a window regulator repair kit. And you better buckle up for that one, because that's a job and a half. So touching on the year and miles and condition and parts availability, if your car that you're looking at has these chrome wheels, these are an aluminum wheel. On Grand Sports, they're staggered. Same thing with Z06 and ZR1, right? It's not forged or anything along those lines, but these wheels are actually known to corrode, and they will not hold air after a while. 9 times out of 10, they wind up cracking or corroding to where they won't hold a bead, and you're going to have to just plan on replacing them. Right now, there's so many of these in the market to where it's not a giant issue, but if you get a car, potentially it's from up north, and there's some corrosion and things like that, plan on having to replace the wheels. But you would do that anyway. Fourth thing to consider, these things fucking leak. You might as well drive a submarine. Just kidding, it's not that bad, but it does get water in the back hatch area. And thankfully the Targa doesn't leak too bad, just kind of around the corners and stuff. But that's kind of a common issue that you'll find on cars like this, you know, 4th gen Camaros, anything that's going to have like T-tops, Targa tops, or it's just made by GM in the 90s and 2000s. So plan on keeping it in a garage or a carport, or, you know, under a car cover. Fifth and final thing you need to consider before purchasing a C6 Corvette is the Targa top, right? Now, if you want a super duper high performance model, your Z06 or your ZR1, you're not getting a Targa top, buddy. So keep that in mind when looking for a car. Also, if you're looking at just a normal narrow body or a Grand Sport car, there's actually cars that came optioned with 2 different Targa tops. One being a glass top like this one here. It's actually not glass, it's plexiglass. Or just the normal painted type of top there. My car has both of them, not because mine came with it, but because I found the other one on Facebook Marketplace. You'll find them all the time out there, but you need to pay attention to condition on these. On a hot summer day, you can actually look in here and you can actually see kind of like hairline etching on these. UV breakdown's real common on these. So if your car does have it, the one that you're looking at, just make sure this thing's not totally screwed before you put it on. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Peace.